lately I've been getting a lot of questions from people asking, how is it that you can transform a whole marriage and all of the patterns that we've been in for 20 or more years in just a few months? And the answer is that there's a really specific sequence that you have to follow, like a recipe, right? You can't bake a cake and then decide at the end that you're going to put the eggs in once it's in the oven. It's the right ingredients, but it's in the wrong order. And if you don't have things in the right order, then the whole thing fails. So for today, I want to talk about the exact process or system that I use inside of the couples cure. And I take couples from feeling very entrenched inside of these dynamics that they've been stuck in. They're on the brink of divorce, to feeling like they're on the same team again, navigating problems from the same side of the table. And more importantly, you're going to understand why the order that we go in matters. Couples come to me after they've been in years of therapy, traditional couples counseling, and they can recite the I statements in their sleep. They know what they're supposed to be doing. But the moment that their spouse says that one thing that just sets them off, they're right back in defensive mode. They're right back into escalating or shutting down or just doing the things that they do that they don't want to be doing. And they think, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just get this right? And so then they want to learn even more. But learning doesn't move the needle, and you're not really doing anything wrong. It's just that you're working against 95% of what is actually running the show, and that's your subconscious programs. And most couples counseling does not address that operating system underneath the skills level. So I'm going to walk you guys through this step by step. And the way that it actually works is, and this is what I do with my clients, is that very first thing we have to do is we start with the vision, not the problems, not where I feel stuck, not what isn't working, although we have to understand that too. But once we actually are in the process of turning things around, we're asking the question, what does my ideal marriage look like? Because if you don't anchor where you're going, you're just going to keep reacting to where you are. So it's sort of like people get into a taxi and they say, whatever you do, don't take me to Times Square. Well, you're still going to end up maybe somewhere you don't want to be, even if you're not at Times Square. So you have to know where you're actually going and what it looks like when you get there, or you're going to stay stuck reacting to the problem forever. And people think that that's what it means to be working on it. So when they come to me, they're in a lot of pain, right? They're just reacting to that pain. And they're coming from this place of like, I want them to stop criticizing me. I want them to stop shutting down. I want to stop feeling like I'm not enough. I want more emotional connection. But that's not a vision. That's just a goal, or it's a complaint. That's just telling the Uber driver where you don't want to go. And that obviously isn't going to get you where you want to go. So a vision means, what does it look like? What does it look like, sound like, feel like once you're there? What do you see? What do you hear? And what do you feel once you have arrived at your vision? So how does your spouse show up as their best self? What adjectives would you use to describe them? What actions are they taking? And how are they making you feel? And how are you showing up as your best self? If you were in a happy marriage, or you were showing up, putting your best foot forward to create that ideal marriage, what would you be doing? What adjectives would somebody use to describe you? And if you walked into your life a year from now and thought, we did it, like we made it, what would be the evidence? What could you point to say, this is how I know that we've arrived? It's not a goals exercise. I would like to have better repair conversations is not a vision. A vision is, I can turn towards my spouse when I'm scared. I can share my truth and they hear me without getting defensive. They lean in, they get curious, and we figure out a solution that works for both of us. Or let's say your goal is, I want to have more emotional connection. Your vision would be that you hear them say, yeah, I've got your back. And you know in your body that they mean it, right? That's something that you can anchor to. That's where your vision is. Because without that vision, every time you hit a fork in the road or a crossroads in this process, or you're not sure, like, they said this, now what do I do? I'm not sure what to do with that because I don't want to do the old way, but I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure what the right action is towards my vision. Well, then we go back and we look at, where's your destination? And then as coaches, we can point you in the right direction based on where your destination is. Every time you're about to have a hard conversation, every time you're about to hold a boundary for the first time, if you're not clear on where you're going, all the tools that you get are just going to be another thing to try to remember when you're already overwhelmed, which we know doesn't work, right? So we want to anchor to this vision at the very beginning of the process. And so every time you get to that place of crossroads, we come back to, not what don't I like that's happening right now, but where am I going? Because without that clarity of direction, you're navigating your marriage like a ship without a compass, and you're just trying not to crash into the rocks. But we need more than that if we're really going to break out of old entrenched patterns. And transformation doesn't come from avoiding disaster, right? It comes from moving towards something greater than what the evidence of your immediate surroundings would prove. You have to reach beyond the feedback of your history or your immediate environment. So that's the first thing. Now, the next thing that we do is we have you looking at yourself and getting really honest about how your subconscious programs are running the show. What is the reason that you keep doing the thing that you swore you'd never do again, right? Like I said before, 95% of your behavior is subconscious. And those programs, those subconscious default modes, those were anchored or locked into you before you had a choice, probably before you were 7 years old. And so you think you're making conscious decisions in the marriage, but you're actually not. Because what you're doing is you're being run by programs that were written long ago before you remember that are stronger than you think. So Bruce Lipton is a cellular biologist, and he talks about this a lot. He wrote the book called Biology of Belief. He researched at Stanford, and what he found, he's sort of the pioneer of epigenetics, this field that understands that we are more than just our DNA. And what he found is that the subconscious mind processes 40 million bits of information per second. That's a lot. And your conscious mind only processes 40 bits of information per second. So that's where I'm getting that number when I say that your subconscious programs are 10 million times more powerful. That is literally true. So when you're trying to remember to stay calm in the heat of the moment, when you're trying to use willpower, when you're trying to override those reactive patterns or those habits that are so strong, it's like you're trying to hold back a tidal wave with your arm and you just don't have the strength. And it's not your fault. It's just nature. And I think most couples come to me easily being able to identify what's wrong with their spouse. But if they could stop pointing the finger, and trust me, I know that it's always a two-way street. Like I know that it's true what they're saying when I'm talking to somebody. What they're describing about their spouse is probably true. But that's not where our power lives, especially if that spouse isn't on the phone call with us or if they're not in the meeting with us. So what I do is I flip that and we have you look inward and ask, what part am I playing in the experience that I'm having? Not to blame you for what other people do, but if you're participating or feeding that dynamic with your energy, or even if you only play 5% in that pattern, you want to ask yourself, where am I engaging in losing strategies? Even if I am just reacting to their BS, what are my adaptive mechanisms? What are my survival skills that I learned that are no longer serving me in my marriage now, that are actually making things worse? These things you learned in childhood that kept you safe at a certain time. Maybe you learned to shut down when things got loud because that's how you survived your parents' arguments. Maybe you learned to people please because that's just how you got love or how you could feel safe. Maybe you learned to go into fix-it mode because if you could just solve people's problems, then you'd finally be good enough, right? You would prove your worthiness. Those strategies worked when you were a kid, but now they're sabotaging your marriage. And so the most counterintuitive, but the most valuable thing is that whatever you see in your life that you don't want, something that's happening in the dance that you do with your spouse that you really are not wanting, that you're very unhappy with, on some level, you have to accept that part of you does want that. It's not the conscious part of you, but there's a part of you that is entertaining it because it feels familiar, not consciously, but subconsciously, right? It matches the blueprint that you internalized about what relationships are supposed to look like. If you don't get real about that and you're always just focusing on an external locus of control, you're literally handing away your power and giving up on the only place where you can make changes. So that's why I really am very strict about that in working with people, is that you have to have the capacity to self-reflect. You have to have the capacity to, or the willingness to look inward and see, not to take blame for stuff that's not on your side of the street, but you have to know the difference. And we're going to get into that in just a second. Last thing I want to say about those default modes that were downloaded into you, it's like a hardware system and you're trying to change the software, but you really have to change the hardware. So if you're willing to reprogram those subconscious patterns, then you clear out the internal blocks to everything else that I'm just about to share. And you have to remember that it's not a weakness. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's just that you're up against something that you can't fix until you go to the heart of the matter. And misdiagnosis of that is the biggest reason why people bypass this. This gets bypassed all the time in traditional methods. And so the only way out is to recondition that root. Now, the second thing we have to do is the skill that changes everything, and that is emotional regulation. Okay, if I could teach you only one thing, it would be that. Because without the ability to regulate your emotions, every other tool is going to fail. Now, this is linked to the programs. This is linked to what I just talked about. But once we understand what our core beliefs are and we change those, we still might have the habit of emotional reactivity because it's just something that is so hardwired into us that it happens before we even realize it. And most of us were not taught this stuff in school. So you have to know how to metabolize your emotions so that they don't derail you. The biggest saboteur in every marriage is not the lack of love, and it's not the lack of care or commitment, because I see people in the trenches for years at a time trying to turn things around. But it's the lack of emotional regulation that tends to derail people the most. And I think that while you're reconditioning those old beliefs, and you're still getting triggered, this is where you want to start, because it does take time to do that first part. So in the meantime, let's say your spouse says something, your heart starts racing, your stomach drops, and suddenly you're in this fight or flight mode. And if you don't know how to soothe your nervous system in the moment, you're going to just do something or say something that's going to play the same old record that you're trying to break away from. And what's really important in this process is that we do everything in our power to not go to the old patterns. We want to do a massive pattern interrupt. So your subconscious doesn't care what your conscious wants. And so when you start to not react from those emotions, let's say you decide to pause for a second, or you say, I'm going to choose to just not react instead of say anything at all. Your programs are going to scream at you. You are going to feel the pull. You're going to feel the discomfort of that, right? You're going to feel guilty because that is not what you were conditioned to do. So the thing you want to make sure that you are aware of is that as soon as you feel that emotion come up, so Terry Real calls it the whoosh, that racing heart, the anxiety, the guilt that you feel when you try to hold a boundary for the first time, the fastest way to get past that is to recognize that that is going to happen. Okay, you just have to expect it. Because I think a lot of times we think, I just hope to God that my emotions don't get the best of me. I just hope that if I recondition these programs, those emotions won't come back again. And we think that the emotional reaction is a failure to the first couple parts, the vision and the programming. But when you expect that this is going to happen, when you expect the intense emotions and you know how to soothe those emotions, that's when you can stay the course. Once you know your vision and you've cleared out your old programs and you've learned to regulate your emotions, that's when you can move into the next step, which is boundaries and how profound they are for emotional connection. But before we move on to that, I just want to say that the emotional regulation piece is what allows you to actually feel your emotions without bypassing them or stuffing them or repressing them. Because if you don't metabolize them or process them or witness them and release them, they're still there. And so a lot of times people get that confused and they think, if I can just try to think my way out of my emotions, just reframe that, put a positive spin on it, say an affirmation. You can't put those on as a Band-Aid on top of strong, overwhelming emotions. You can temporarily, but what that does is it just sublimates your emotions, and in the end, they will always win. So that's why this is such an important skill, is you have to be able to recognize your emotions, know what they are, withstand them, observe them, and be separate from them, to observe them as an outsider to that, as a witness, because externalizing that is what gives you power over it. And that's the skill that makes everything else possible. Now we move into boundaries, right? So once we've got those things in place, I also just want to say that we're going to get into emotional connection separately, but I just have to mention it here as a positive outcome that we get from healthy boundaries. You cannot have real emotional connection without strong boundaries. And most people get that backwards. Everybody wants emotional connection in their marriage. But I think we think that that means that there aren't boundaries. Like, we can conflate that. We can start to think that to be close to somebody means that you can't have boundaries, but it's actually the other way around. Because if you don't have really safe boundaries, and we're not talking walls, we're talking about flexible boundaries that allow you to sort of open up that fence and close it at will. If you don't have that, you can feel suffocated, or you can spend all of your time overstepping and growing the disconnection. You might be somebody who feels very absorbed in the lack of boundaries, or you might be somebody that's overstepping and engulfing your partner because there's not clear boundaries. Either way, it's not safe. And I want to be clear that boundaries are not about saying no. Boundaries are about just knowing where you end and where your spouse begins. Because when something goes wrong, you have to know how much of that is on my side of the street. How much of what you're picking up isn't yours, right? If you grew up caretaking your parents, if you were a parentified child, if you learned to read the room and manage everybody else's emotions to stay safe, and you don't know what's yours and what isn't, there's going to be a whole lot of problems that come from that. Because you move into codependency. You think that what isn't yours is yours. But boundaries work both ways. It's not just about what you're not going to allow from the outside. It's also about what you're not going to allow from yourself to spill out onto your spouse or others around you. And maybe you feel justified to unleash a laundry list of criticism because you're the victim in the story. Or maybe you feel like you've earned the right to just let loose because you've had it and it's been long enough and your spouse has been egregious for long enough. But unloading on somebody in that way is a boundary violation too, from the inside out. Terry Real calls that offending from the victim position. And I think what people miss is that real boundaries don't really require anything from the other person. You hold them on your own, and that's the empowering good news. Communicating your boundaries is half the battle only. The other half is enforcing them, and only you enforce them. Just telling them what they are and then hoping that they'll enforce them or hold them for you is not enough most of the time, especially if you're engaging in pattern interrupts and they're used to the way that it used to be. And now you're changing where the line is. Get ready to enforce that. Because if you just say what you need and then cave the moment that they push back, that's not a boundary. That's just a wish. That's just a request. That's just you hoping that they're going to do something different. And if they don't, well, oh, well, now everything is back to, hell in a handbasket, but you've given them your power. So a lot of people in my program struggle with this at first. They think if I do that, if I really hold this boundary, then they're going to get upset and that's going to cause more problems, or they're going to pull away. And what if I lose them? Or what if that pisses them off? And now we're even more disconnected. And I say that if you lose yourself to keep them close, then you've already lost both of you. Because without boundaries, emotional connection isn't safe. And you can't be vulnerable with someone if you don't know where you end and they begin. You'll either merge and lose yourself, or you'll wall off to protect yourself. And neither one of those is intimacy. So once healthy boundaries are in place, only then can you build a strong and reliable emotional connection. And that's the next thing that we move into. Emotional connection is the most misunderstood concept in marriage, in my opinion. I think a lot of people think it's about sharing your feelings. Emotional connection means I'm talking about my emotions and my spouse is listening to me talk about my emotions. But it's not really about that, although that can be a part of it. But that's just one part of it. It's really about being, you have a safe place to land in your marriage. You think emotional connection is about showing how you feel, showing all of your cards, and that's really part of it. But it's about them having the ability to actually hold space for them, and you internalizing the feeling that no matter what I share, if I share my truth in a boundaried way, that they've still got my back. They're not going to judge me. Dr. Sue Johnson is the creator of emotionally focused therapy, and she's really drawing on old attachment theory research from John Bowlby from a long time ago. But she took that original research and she spent decades studying what makes marriage last. And what she found is that it's not about the communication skill. It's not about the shared hobby. It's about, or your shared interests, right? It's about that safety. So what that means is that when you turn towards your spouse in distress, you know that they're going to be accessible, and they're going to be responsive, and they're going to be consistently available in that way. That's what emotional connection is, which is essentially, another way to put it is primal safety. It means that I can tell you what's really going on for me, and you're not going to make it all about you. You're not going to react. You're not going to defensive. You'll be curious, and you'll hold space for me when I share my truth with you. Emotional connection and that safety also means I am distinct from you. And so therefore you can hear me as a separate other without making it about you. But it also means that while I'm distinct from you, I'm right up against you, and I can support you without losing myself, or you can support me without losing yourself. We can make each other feel like we've got each other's backs, and we mean it. We know that we've got each other's backs. And that's why we can't start with communication tools, because until you know that, your filters of lack of safety are going to distort the messages that you're hearing in your communication tools. If you don't feel safe with your spouse, it doesn't matter how perfectly you deliver the I statement. They're still going to hear it through the filter of you're criticizing me again. You're never happy. I can't do anything right. So the content doesn't matter if the safety isn't there. So where we help you with that is we do specific exercises to help you understand what's going on for the other person, why they don't feel safely or securely attached to you, and what the dance is that they do. They're owning, or you could own what you do when you start to feel lack of safety, because usually there's some kind of acting out behaviors. And once we understand what's going on for the other person, or when they understand what's going on for us, we find empathy. We find empathy to embrace our differences instead of making them mean that something's wrong, or that there's something wrong with them, or whatever meaning that we attach to it is what the problem is. Our differences are not the problem. It's really the meaning that we assign to those differences. A lot of couples get tripped up thinking we're just too different, we're incompatible. I don't really believe in incompatibility unless there's a fundamental life dream that you have that you can't have with your spouse, or there's fundamental values in the way that you live your life that you simply cannot abide by because there's such a strong difference. But that's a very small percentage of the couples that I talk to. In my opinion and from my experience, it's not those differences. It's just what you've decided that means about them. But the good thing about emotional connection is that once you've mastered that, everything changes. You're able to allow for that. And you stop being enemies, you stop being opponents, and you become unified against the problem. So it's not me versus you anymore. It's us against this pattern. And only once you've got that emotional connection and safety in your marriage, only then can you really dive into the communication tools, but not before. And that is where couples counseling usually starts. So now we will get into the communication tools, and you can see we've done so many things first, but where we're about to go now is where most couples counseling begins. Now, if you start here, it backfires because I think every couples counselor teaches I statements. I think you can learn the feedback wheel. You can learn to bring things up in a non-critical way, but the toolkit isn't going to work, like I said before, if that safety isn't there. But let's say you've already done that. Okay. Let's say you have the safety in place. You've been warned. Now you can move into the toolkit that actually works. Okay. But you've got to do the inner work first. Reconditioning your beliefs, regulating your emotions and your nervous system, holding boundaries, building emotional safety. And now we get into the stuff that's actually really easy now, right? Now we can learn the tools and actually use them because you're not fighting against yourself anymore. So the tools that I teach are the tools that let you take a successful time out without your spouse feeling abandoned or stonewalled. I mean, I just got this from Terry Real's 10 Commandments of a Timeout. I highly recommend it. You can Google it. Because you have to take distance sometimes, but you have to do it in a responsible way that doesn't make your spouse feel like you're just ditching them or stonewalling them or giving them the silent treatment, which is definitely losing strategy. You also can learn how to give feedback without creating defensiveness, speak your truth honestly without worrying that you're going to destroy them. And the structure of these tools is what keeps you and them safe. And so an example of that would be the feedback wheel, which is not a wheel. It's just a 4-point structure. Here's what the trigger is, facts only. Here's the meaning that I gave that. That's my interpretation, right or wrong. You don't get to argue with that because that is just what the meaning is that I gave it. That's a fact. The third thing is how I felt as a result of the meaning I gave it. What are the emotions that I had? And the fourth part, which is what makes it constructive, is what am I asking for? What would help me feel better? If you don't have that, it's just a complaint. But you have to have part 4 to make it actually productive. What am I actually asking for? What can my spouse give me to help me feel better? And that's how we move into constructive communication. Now, we also, once we can do that, we can have some longer term repair conversations, clearing the resentments that you've been carrying for years, the things that you really felt like your spouse never truly understood or expressed remorse for. That's when we can start to move into these healing conversations. And it's not to rehash old wounds, but it's to lift the past up, examine it, glean what we can from it, leave the rest, turn the page for good. Like it's almost like a detoxing where when you're detoxing, it feels worse before it gets better. We don't want to live there, but we have to bring it up and out to be cleared of it completely. And that's the reason we don't start there, is because in order to truly turn the page on the past for good, you do have to have a new foundation that you're standing on from the previous steps that I already shared, right? You have to go through that process of clearing your subconscious programs, knowing how to regulate yourself emotionally, having clear boundaries, having that emotional connection. And then you know that you have what it takes to navigate a breach and disconnection in the future. So there's no harm in turning the page from the past, because it's not like you're just sweeping things under the rug like you used to. Now you actually have the tools to address it as it comes up, but it's not against the backlog of years and years and of accumulation of these hurts and resentments. You really can clear these things once and for all. I mean, truly, after 40 years, even I've worked with couples where they can clear out the baggage of the past and truly say, look, that was then, and I don't even have to worry about it because the now is so good. I just want to enjoy the now. And so the next time you have an argument, you don't have all of that just festering, and it doesn't inform your filter anymore of what's happening in the present moment. And this master toolkit is what you can use for the rest of your life. Whenever anything comes up, you know exactly how to talk about it. You're not scared to bring things up anymore. You're not scared to hear what they have to say because you know how to separate out that's the meaning they give that. That's not objective truth. And so you don't get defensive, right? That way, you don't stuff it and hope that it goes away if you're an avoidant. And you also have the confidence to just stay in your lane if you tend to be more anxiously attached. So that's where we finally get into the meat and potatoes of the communication tools. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking, I really need this and I need somebody to walk me through this step by step, I want to invite you to book a call. You can book a free call with our team. It is a breakthrough call. It's a strategy call to better understand your scenario. It's not a free venting call. It is a chance to just get clarity and for us to discover where you're stuck, what you really want, and to see if we can help you bridge the gap. and to explore working together. And then you also have an opportunity without any obligation or cost to figure out if it's a right fit for you as well. And then if you want to join, of course, then we can go over the options of how we can support you. And either way, you walk away with a roadmap and some pillars of what we teach either way. And I'll put the link down below. Now, once you've mastered the communication tools, you're ready for the next stage, which is advanced, which is us consciousness. I have been talking about this for years and years, but in the last year and a half, Terry Real came out with a book called Us, and I highly recommend it, where he really talks about the phenomenon, the neuroscience, and the collective consciousness of the us consciousness. This can be on a macro level, this can be on a micro level, but it's essentially building a future that works for both of you. So moving into the us consciousness is moving sort of permanently into this mentality of we are on the same side of the table in solving all the problems. We are always on the same side. So this is where you stop negotiating from opposite sides, staying, out of that me versus you mentality, and building from where your life dreams overlap, building from where your goals are the same. Most couples spend so much time arguing about differences, like, I want to live in this city and you want to live in the country. How can I convince them? And then they're convincing me. And then you're just like stuck in this convincing mode from polar opposites, and you're in this false duality, right? This false polarization. But really the right question to be asking is, where do our dreams overlap? What is the why behind where I want to live? And how can we find a way to satisfy the why for both of us? How do we build up from there? How do we find a solution that we both feel good about? So you have to get really creative, and you're solidifying those shifts between that knee-jerk impulse to want to convince them of the rightness of your position, or the default of wanting to block against that pressure that you feel from them to be convinced of what they're saying. But it's from a place of honoring each of your life dreams and just asking questions and getting really curious. What does it mean to you if you were to live in the country? Here's what it means to me to live in the city. And if we look at the why, I bet you anything we can find a solution that's very creative, that's outside the box, that we both feel good about. And that's how you customize a marriage and not fit into the cookie cutter version of what somebody else would have you do. This is where it gets really authentic to who you are and what your life dreams are, and from a very self-honoring place, because we all have our own journeys and we all have our own life dreams and our own paths and our own callings. And a really healthy marriage allows you to honor yours and also honor theirs at the same time. Now, this part is going to necessitate that you move into the 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions, or higher, right? At least 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative. You can handle anything once you're in that place. You can negotiate differences. You can stay connected even when you disagree. And when you get stuck, you don't spiral. You don't catastrophize. You have the tools to quickly come back into connection. You have the tools to quickly look at what something means, what activated you, and have that repair conversation within hours instead of letting it fester for days and living in that disconnect. And so by the end of the 14 weeks, once you've done this, you have a customized roadmap for your relationship. You know exactly what your vision is. You know that right away in the very beginning. And now you have the skills and the tools and the cleared out BS on both sides of the street to actually live it, to practice it day in and day out. Just like you were going to practice a healthy lifestyle with what you put into your body and what you eat and where you go to work out or what you do to take care of yourself. That's what we do for marriage too. And that's how you reclaim your marriage, and you stop being roommates. You stop feeling like strangers. You become true partners again. You tap back into why you picked each other in the first place. But it's better than it was before, because now you have something you never had before. You're not just hoping that the stuff doesn't get activated. You actually have what it takes to navigate it and clear out the BS for good. A lot of it is cleared out for good. And some of it is just going to fall into that category of unsolvable things that are going to come up in a marriage that John Gottman discovered in his longitudinal research. There's a certain percentage of problems that are never solvable in a marriage that is happy and then goes a distance. It's just that you work around it because you have enough other positive things. If you're in a 20-to-1 positive ratio, the negative things that you can't see eye to eye on are marginalized in comparison to the things that you're enjoying in your relationship. So you just don't care about them that much. They might be a minor irritant in the larger scheme of things, a drop in the bucket. But by that time, it only takes 4 months to have those skills to stay connected for the long haul. So just to recap, the reason I think in my experience, and this is after I was separated from my husband twice, we still talk about how, it was a miracle that we came out the other side. The reason that most couples stay stuck is because they're trying to fix the behavior without addressing the underlying operating system beneath the behavior. And they're trying to communicate better while their nervous system is still wired for fear. And they're trying to hold boundaries without knowing where they end and where their spouse begins. And they're trying to connect emotionally without safety in the first place. And there's just no way that you can problem solve if you don't feel safe with your spouse. It works because it addresses things in the right sequence. The vision first, so you know where you're going. Subconscious reconditioning, so you're not sabotaging yourself at every turn. nervous system regulation, so you can stay calm even when your spouse does something that's really triggering to your trauma and your programs, healthy boundaries, so you know where you end and they begin, and so you don't pick up what isn't yours, emotional connection, so you feel safe enough to be vulnerable and hold space for your spouse to do the same, communication tools so that you can repair and clear resentment and resolve conflict. And finally, the us consciousness. So you're building a future together that honors each of you at the same time. In the us consciousness is if it's a problem for your spouse, it's a problem for you too. And so if it's not going to work for one of you, ultimately it's not going to work for either of you. And so each of these stages builds on the last. But I think, in my opinion, it's really about having a community of people who speak the same language. It's about being around people who are walking the same talk as you. It's around people who are holding you accountable when you backslide. And that's basically what we do in there too. So that's an important thing I didn't mention before. It's not just about your individual journey and what you're learning, but it's about being surrounded and being able to benefit from the energy of other people who are struggling with the same thing. I feel like there's this undercurrent of, well, we're in couples counseling, but we don't want anybody in our community to know. But anybody that wants to go the distance in their marriage is going to know that everybody needs help along the way. Everybody needs support along the way. And I think that needs to be normalized. And again, I'll put the link below if you guys are interested in booking a call to get some support around this for your unique relationship. That's it for today. If you like my content, please take a second and either like this video or subscribe to my channel, or both. That will help us reach the people that really need to hear this stuff.